Yale Witman sat alone in his sleek corner office, the panoramic view of the city lights behind him doing little to distract from the storm brewing inside his mind. Dozens of performance reports lay spread across the glass desk, neatly printed, organized, and color-coded. Sales, stable. Profits, respectable. On the surface, everything looked fine, but something gnawed at him. A tension, subtle but persistent, had been building over the past year, and now it was impossible to ignore. His family's fast food chain had once been a humble roadside diner run by his father, a charismatic man who knew every customer by name and every employee's birthday. Over decades it had grown into a modest empire, 11 locations dotted across the state, each with the same logo, the same menu, and supposedly the same spirit. When his father died 5 years ago, the weight of the business passed to Yale. At first, he was passionate, present, walking the floor of every store, chatting with employees, tasting the fries, making tweaks where needed. But as expansion accelerated, he found himself buried in board meetings, entangled in spreadsheets and forecasts instead of human stories. Lately, the cracks were widening. Complaints were flooding in from every corner. Slow service, rude behavior, incorrect orders, and a disturbingly high employee turnover. Greg, his district manager, painted a reassuring picture. Just growing pains, he claimed. We've got it under control. But Yale's gut said otherwise. If everything was fine, why did it feel like the heart of the business was decaying? That night, Yale made a decision that would change everything. He would step out of the office and into the chaos. The next morning, he stripped away his identity as CEO. Gone was the custom-tailored suit. In its place, a shapeless uniform, a cheap name tag that read Kevin, a fake beard, thick-rimmed glasses, and a hoarse, nondescript tone that veiled his real voice. It was an imperfect disguise, but enough. After all, most of the frontline workers had never seen him in person. His presence lived only in cold memos and distant emails. He chose the chain's busiest location, a 24-hour store infamous for complaints, always crowded and reportedly chronically understaffed. Greg chalked it up to employees dodging overtime, but Yale was skeptical. The moment he walked through the doors, the noise hit him like a wave. The air smelled of grease and exhaustion. The line stretched all the way to the entrance, customers visibly agitated. The fryer beeped relentlessly, orders backed up, and the staff on duty looked one bad shift away from collapse. The shift manager, Dale, a thick-set man in his 40s with a booming voice and the attitude of a drill sergeant, stood slouched against the counter, shouting commands while doing little himself. "Hey, new guy," he barked. "You're on register. Try not to screw up." Yale offered a quiet nod, stepping into place. It didn't take long to see the root of the problem. Customers were restless, their frustration palpable. Orders stacked up on the monitors like an avalanche, and the kitchen was struggling to keep up. Every second felt heavier than the last. Then came a voice, soft, trembling, and desperate. "Please, I really need the extra hours." Yale turned his head just enough to glimpse the scene. A teenage girl, maybe 18 at most, stood near the back of the kitchen, her oversized uniform swallowing her small frame. She held her time card like a lifeline, knuckles pale. Dale rolled his eyes. "Not my problem, Olivia. We're cutting back hours, not handing them out." "But she started, only to be cut off. "Unless you're volunteering to work for free, I don't care. Now get back to work." Something inside Yale sank. Her voice had cracked, not just from nerves, but from the weight of something deeper. Fear, maybe, or the suffocating pressure of life slipping just beyond control. He made a mental note. Watch her. Something wasn't right. For the next few hours, he worked in silence. Register duties, wiping down counters, listening, always listening. Olivia never stopped moving, taking orders, sprinting to restock supplies, even manning the fryers when the cook disappeared. She barely paused to drink water. Her eyes were tired, but her pace never faltered. Meanwhile, Dale lingered at the counter, face glued to his phone, only reacting when a customer's complaint became impossible to ignore. Later, during a brief lull, Yale approached her near the napkin dispensers. "You okay?" he asked gently. She offered a strained smile, the kind that tried to hide exhaustion but couldn't quite pull it off. "Yeah, just tired. I heard you asking for extra hours earlier." The smile faltered. "Yeah, my mom just lost her job. Rent's due next week. I thought picking up more shifts might help, but..." Dale said no. Yale frowned, "But this place is clearly understaffed." She let out a dry, almost bitter chuckle. "Yeah, but Dale's got favorites. He gives the best shifts to his buddies, people who don't question him." And just like that, the pieces started to fit together. Greg's narrative of lazy workers fell apart. What Yale saw was something else. Dedicated employees like Olivia being ignored, mistreated, and overworked, while those who towed the line or kept silent got rewarded. His stomach clenched. This wasn't a staffing issue. It was a culture problem. One that had silently corrupted everything his father had worked so hard to build. But now, Yale wasn't just there to watch. He was going to fight for the truth. He stayed until the dinner rush, letting the chaos unfold around him. Orders surged, the kitchen spiraled, and Dale barked louder, his own sweat barely touched by labor. Olivia continued to hustle, her face red, hair sticking to her temples, hands moving on autopilot. Yale watched her ask for help twice. Once when a machine jammed, both times for someone to refill the sauces. Once when a machine jammed. Both times Dale brushed her off or sent her to do something else. What Yale witnessed wasn't failure, it was injustice, and it was about to meet its reckoning. The tension in the restaurant reached a boiling point. A customer at the front counter slammed his tray down, scowling as he raised his voice. "This is missing a whole item!" Yale instinctively turned to Dale, expecting the manager to take control of the situation. But Dale didn't move. Without even lifting his gaze from his phone, he waved dismissively and muttered, "Figure it out, rookie." Yale's jaw tightened. He inhaled through his nose, suppressing the surge of frustration that threatened to spill out. "Calm," he reminded himself. "Not yet." With measured patience, he retrieved the missing item and handed it to the customer, offering a genuine apology. As he turned back, his eyes landed on Olivia. She stood off to the side, her fingers rubbing at her temples like she was trying to push the exhaustion out of her skull. Her face was pale, drawn tight with fatigue, and still she pressed on. Then it happened. A sharp, indignant voice tore through the restaurant. "Why is my order wrong?" Yale snapped his head around. A middle-aged man stood at the counter, holding his tray high like an accusation. His face was flushed, a mix of frustration and disbelief. Olivia, quick to act, moved toward him, already reaching for the receipt in his hand. "Let me fix that for you, sir." But before she could finish, Dale stepped forward, arms folded, eyes cold. "You probably ordered it wrong," he said flatly. The customer's mouth opened in disbelief. "Excuse me?" Dale rolled his eyes with a dramatic sigh. "Look, we're slammed. If you want another order, get back in line." The room went silent except for the hum of the fryers. Olivia stood frozen beside Yale, her fists clenched so tightly her knuckles turned white. The customer shook his head in disbelief and stormed out. And something inside Yale snapped. "Take my register for a minute," he said to Olivia, his voice low but commanding. She blinked, confused, but obeyed as Yale reached up. With a single deliberate motion, he pulled off the glasses, then the fake beard. His real face emerged, sharper, more authoritative. Dale glanced up, ready to bark again, then froze. Recognition hit like a thunderclap. Dale's eyes widened, his mouth fell open, the color draining from his face. Yale stood tall, folding his arms. "Dale, we need to talk now." The room froze. Olivia stumbled a step back, staring at him in shock. The kitchen staff peered out from behind shelves and heat lamps, utensils held mid-air. Nobody moved. "Waited. You're not Kevin," Dale stammered, voice cracking. Yale's expression didn't change. "And you're not someone who should be managing people." Jeff looked like he might bolt. Sir, I didn't know." Yale cut him off, voice like steel. "That's the problem. You shouldn't have to know it's me to do your job with integrity." He gestured sharply. "Office, now." Dale hesitated. But Yale's authority left no room for argument. Head low, Dale turned and walked stiffly to the back, Yale following close behind. The restaurant remained frozen, a breath held mid-inhale. Inside the small office, Dale's usual swagger evaporated. He stood hunched, hands fidgeting in front of him like a schoolboy caught cheating. "Sir, I didn't realize." Yale's voice was quiet, controlled, but every syllable hit like a hammer. "I saw you ignore your team. I saw you dismiss a hard-working employee asking for more hours. I saw you humiliate a customer. That's just one shift. One." Dale shifted, looking anywhere but Yale's eyes. "We're short-staffed. I do what I can." "No, you don't," Yale snapped. "You hide behind your authority while the people beneath you drown. You give hours based on favoritism, not merit. You make life harder for the ones trying the hardest. Olivia? She's working herself into the ground, and you shut her down like she's nothing." Dale's lip curled slightly. "She's young. She'll bounce back. Besides, I can't give all the hours to one person." "This isn't about hours, it's about dignity," Yale shot back. He leaned in, eyes blazing. "You don't lead with apathy and ego. You lift people, you support them, you protect them, and clearly, that's not something you're capable of." Dale's face darkened. "So, what then? You're firing me?" Yale's voice dropped an octave, calm and deadly serious. "I'm holding you accountable. You're stepping down. Effective immediately." Dale opened his mouth to protest, but no words came. Finally, he scoffed. "Fine. Good luck running this place without me." Yale stared him down. "We'll manage." With a bitter laugh, Dale stormed out. Yale let out a long breath, steadying his nerves before re-entering the dining area. Silence. All eyes turned to him. The air was thick with uncertainty. He walked to the counter, stopping beside Olivia. "How many hours were you hoping to get?" he asked gently. She blinked, as if waking from a dream. "As many as I can." "Done," he said. "And I want you to know, I see you. I see how hard you work. That won't go unnoticed again." Olivia blinked rapidly, her throat working as she fought emotion. Her shoulders relaxed, ever so slightly. Yale turned to address the team. His voice rose with quiet power. "Things are changing, starting now. No more favoritism, no more silence. Hard work will be recognized, and disrespect toward customers or each other won't be tolerated." A low murmur rippled through the room. Heads nodded, shoulders straightened. Olivia gave the faintest smile. For the first time in years, Yale felt it. That spark his father had carried so effortlessly. The one that had once made a roadside diner feel like home. But he knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. He stepped behind the counter again, his eyes sweeping the faces around him. There was trust to rebuild, culture to repair, managers to evaluate. He could see it in their eyes, the cautious hope, the uncertainty, the questions, but also something else, belief. Then the back door swung open. A man in his early 50s, graying and grim-faced, entered. Greg, the district manager. His eyes flicked across the restaurant, taking in the stillness, the staff's wary stares. When he saw Yale behind the counter, in a cheap uniform, his expression shifted from confusion to barely veiled frustration. He made a beeline for him, every step deliberate, voice low. "What exactly is going on here?" Yale didn't flinch, arms folded, gaze steady. "I could ask you the same thing." Greg's jaw tensed. His eyes darted to the employees, then back to Yale. "I got a call, said there was an incident, that you forced Dale out." Yale held his ground. "I didn't force him out. I did what you failed to do. I held him accountable." Greg's breath caught. This wasn't going to be a quiet conversation. But for Yale, silence was no longer an option. Greg's nostrils flared as he exhaled sharply, his posture stiffening like a man about to step into a storm. "Look," he said, voice low and tight. "I don't know what kind of show you're trying to put on here, but this isn't how you run a business. Micromanaging every tiny complaint. Stores have issues, employees whine. That's the nature of the job." Yale's jaw clenched. He'd heard this line before, from people too detached to see the damage they'd normalized. "That's not how this works," he replied, voice steady but charged. "That's an excuse. If you spent even a fraction of your time on the floor instead of behind a spreadsheet, you'd see it. These aren't isolated complaints. They're symptoms of a deeper rot." Greg let out a cold chuckle. "So you play cashier for a few hours and now you think you've got the whole system figured out?" Yale didn't blink. "I spent a few hours watching customers leave because they were treated like burdens. I watched employees stretch themselves thin just to keep the place from collapsing while their manager scrolled through his phone. I listened to one of the most dedicated workers here plead for hours she'd earned, only to be brushed off like she was nothing." Greg's lips pressed into a line, his defense wearing thin. "You're blowing this way out of proportion. Dale had his flaws, sure, but he knew how to run a store. And now that you've fired him, you've created a leadership vacuum. So tell me, who's supposed to step up?" Yale didn't hesitate. "Olivia." The room stilled. The hum of the fryers seemed to fade. Heads turned. Even Olivia, who had been lingering near the counter, jerked slightly, as if someone had just pulled the floor from beneath her. Her eyes widened, her fingers twitched at her sides. Greg scoffed. "You've got to be kidding." "I'm not," Yale said simply. "She's already been doing the job, without recognition, without support. She knows the staff, she understands the work, and most importantly, she's stepped up when no one else would." Olivia opened her mouth. Her voice came out small, barely audible. "But I've never managed before." Yale turned to her, his tone gentle but unwavering. "You've already been leading. The only thing missing is the title and the authority to back your choices. You earned this." Greg shook his head in disbelief. "This is absurd. You can't just hand a management position to a kid who's never been trained." Yale didn't look at Greg. His eyes stayed on Olivia. "Do you want this opportunity?" She looked around, unsure if this was a trap, unsure if someone would yank the offer away the moment she accepted. But something inside her shifted, straightened. She took a breath. "Yes," she said. Yale nodded once. "Then it's yours." Greg threw up his hands, laughing bitterly. "You're making a huge mistake." "No," Yale said, cool and even. "The mistake was letting this place become something my father wouldn't recognize. The mistake was ignoring people like Olivia while defending people like Dale." Greg's face darkened. "You're the owner. You can do what you want. Just don't expect me to clean up when it all falls apart." "If you see change as a mess," Yale said calmly, Maybe that's why this system failed under your watch." Greg stared at him, nostrils flaring. Then, without another word, he turned and marched toward the exit. "You'll regret this," he muttered over his shoulder before disappearing out the door. Silence filled the space he left behind. Yale turned back to Olivia. "You'll have my full support. I'll make sure you get the training and tools you need, but I trust you to lead this team, your team, with integrity." Something flickered in her eyes. Fear, determination, hope. It all collided in her chest like a fire she didn't know she had. "I won't let you down," she said. "I know you won't." Around them, the employees were still trying to catch up with everything that had just happened. Some whispered quietly, others just watched. But Yale could feel it. The beginning of something different. Something better. The following morning, he returned to the store, this time not as an undercover worker, but as himself. Crisp button down, polished shoes, a man reclaiming his role, not just as an owner, but as a leader. The employees eyed him with cautious curiosity. Was yesterday a fluke, or had something really changed? He spotted Olivia by the counter, clutching a clipboard like it was both armor and anchor, her brows furrowed, lips pursed in focus. She had arrived early, already knee-deep in scheduling and inventory. No training, no experience, but a drive to get it right. He approached the counter, letting her notice him first. She straightened instinctively, her shoulders tense. He gestured to the clipboard. "Didn't realize scheduling was mostly fixing someone else's mess," she muttered. Yale glanced at the wall schedule. A disaster. Random shifts, scattered hours, blatant favoritism. Olivia had started reorganizing it, making it fairer, more structured. "I had to call a few people about picking up hours," she added. Most of them thought it was a mistake, like they weren't used to being asked. The sentence lingered between them. It said everything. These workers had stopped expecting fairness, stopped expecting anything at all. Yale studied her, noting the flicker of doubt in her eyes, waiting for someone to tell her she had overstepped, but he didn't. "Keep going," he said. "Fix what needs fixing." Her eyes softened, just slightly. Her grip on the clipboard firmed, and she turned back to work. As Yale made his way to the office, he noticed a subtle shift. The employees moved with more purpose. They chatted lightly, without tension. It was still a restaurant, it was still work, but the atmosphere had changed. Still, fixing one store wasn't enough. He picked up the phone and called headquarters. By midday, he was seated in a conference room with his regional managers, minus Greg. After yesterday's events, Yale had already begun the process of removing him. The room was quiet, the air thick with curiosity and unease. Yale didn't waste time. He laid it all out, what he'd seen, what he'd felt, from favoritism and dysfunction to silent workers too afraid to speak. He told them about Olivia, about how a girl barely old enough to vote had shown more leadership than half the management team combined. The managers listened, some skeptical, some nodding with slow recognition. Finally, Marisa, a woman in her late 40s, spoke. "I always had doubts about Dale. Employees mentioned things, but Greg always brushed it off." Dale leaned forward, and now we know it wasn't being handled. Evan, one of the newer managers, frowned. "If it happened there, how many other stores are like that?" The question landed like a weight. "Too many," Yale said, "and we're going to find out." Over the next week, an internal audit was launched. Managers were evaluated, employees were interviewed, feedback was collected, cross-checked and analyzed. The patterns were undeniable. Neglect, favoritism, poor leadership. It wasn't everywhere, but it was enough. Several managers were let go, others were put on notice with structured plans for improvement. Leadership training became mandatory. No more assumptions, no more pretending. Through it all, Yale visited the stores himself. No suits, no press, just presence. And when he returned to Olivia's store at the end of that week, it was unmistakable. Change had taken root. The tension was gone. Employees smiled more freely. The space felt lighter, and there behind the counter stood Olivia, talking with a coworker, clipboard in hand. Her posture was more upright, her voice more confident, and she was exactly where she belonged. Olivia was becoming more at ease in her role. The uncertainty that once shadowed her every step now seemed to lift, replaced by a quiet confidence. As she noticed Yale walking in, she wiped her hands on her apron and made her way over. "The new schedules are working," she said with a small smile. "People actually want to be here." Yale nodded, his expression calm but proud. "That's how it should be." She hesitated, eyes scanning the store. "I thought this was temporary. That maybe things would go back to how they were before." "They won't," Yale said, his voice firm and reassuring. "Not while I'm here." For the first time since their paths had crossed, Olivia's face fully softened. Her shoulders relaxed. In that moment, she believed. Not just in Yale's words, but in the idea that the nightmare they had all learned to live with wouldn't come creeping back. This wasn't just about cleaning up a mess. It was about locking the door behind it and never letting it in again. In the weeks that followed, the company underwent a transformation that ran deeper than policy. It became a cultural reset. Every store was touched by it. Procedures rewritten, oversight heightened, and every manager, regardless of tenure, required to complete comprehensive leadership training. The old ways, unchecked authority, crony-based scheduling, dismissive attitudes toward employee voices, were dismantled piece by piece. Yale didn't hide behind a desk. He walked into the stores, unannounced and unarmored. He asked questions. He listened. He looked into the eyes of the people keeping the business alive and made sure they knew their worth. At Olivia's location, the change was almost unrecognizable from what it once was. The shift in energy was undeniable. Where tension once lived in every corner, now there was rhythm, flow, unity. People weren't just showing up, they were showing up for each other. One busy afternoon, Yale returned unannounced. The lunch rush was in full swing. Customers flowed in steadily, but the line moved quickly, efficiently. The fryers hissed, the register chimed, and orders passed hand to hand like clockwork. At the center of it all was Olivia. She moved with grace, communicating clearly, checking in on stations, answering questions before they became problems. Her leadership was steady, unforced. There was no barking, no chaos, only a calm, collective effort. Yale watched as a small issue emerged at the front, an incorrect order. The customer, mildly frustrated, stepped forward. Olivia approached immediately, listened attentively, offered a sincere apology, fixed the mistake, and even added a small discount. The customer left satisfied, no tension lingering. That, Yale thought, was what leadership looked like. Not perfection, responsibility. As she turned from helping another team member, Olivia spotted Yale. She approached, towel in hand, face flushed but composed. He gestured toward the humming restaurant. "You've built something real here." She followed his gaze, then smiled faintly. "It's not just me. They finally feel like their work matters." That was the heart of it. When people knew they mattered, they gave more. When they felt seen, they stood taller. Respect wasn't an add-on. It was the baseline. Yale motioned toward the back. Olivia nodded and led him into the office. Gone was the chaos that had once defined the room. Papers were neatly stacked, schedules pinned with care. The energy was intentional, organized. Leaning against the desk, arms crossed, Olivia eyed him with a mix of pride and caution. I keep waiting for something to go wrong. Yale understood. People who had lived too long inside broken systems learned to flinch at peace. Stability felt foreign, even dangerous. If something does go wrong, he said gently, you'll handle it. That's leadership. She absorbed that quietly, then offered. Some of the team has started bringing up things they were scared to say before, pay issues, shift concerns, ideas to make things smoother. That was exactly what Yale hoped for. He nodded. And how are you handling them? Case by case, what I can fix, I fix, what I can't, I explain. But I make sure they know I'm listening. That single sentence held more value than any quarterly report. She wasn't just managing, she was leading with care, with presence. You've got this place running like a dream, he said, but I don't want you stuck here forever. Her brows pulled in. What do you mean? There's more out there for you, beyond these walls. She frowned, caught off guard. I just started. And you've already proven you can lead at a higher level, he said. Not today, not tomorrow, but someday. Leadership like yours isn't meant to stay still. She looked down, processing, then finally nodded. I'll think about it. That was enough, for now. As Yale stepped out of the office, he spotted a young employee Olivia had been mentoring, a quiet kid near the stockroom, carefully organizing inventory. His movements were precise, methodical. Olivia joined him, asked about the new system he'd suggested. He explained confidently, and she responded with feedback and trust. That was the ecosystem Yale wanted across every store, a place where people didn't just follow, they contributed, built, belonged. As he headed for the exit, his eyes landed on an elderly couple finishing their lunch near the window. They smiled at the cashier, waved as they left. Their order was right, their service warm. A month ago, they would have walked out frustrated. Now, they walked out satisfied. That was the measure of success. Outside, Yale pulled out his phone. He made a note, check in again in a few weeks. Not because he doubted Olivia, quite the opposite. Because he understood that change wasn't a single act. It was a promise, a commitment, a quiet vow that had to be renewed every day by showing up, by staying involved. This wasn't the conclusion of the story. It was the moment it truly began.